Hi, welcome back to Movie Review Mom. And if you're new here, welcome. I'm so happy to have you join us. Well, join me. I'm the mom and I do movie reviews. My big goal is to give you the heads up on the content and the quality of movies so you can decide if you want to spend your time and your money watching them and supporting them. So today, the movie I'm reviewing is Chasing Childhood. Now, this is actually getting its world premiere for the very first time. I know that's redundant. In the American Perspective section at the 2020 Doc NYC Film Festival. So, in case you don't know what that is, it is America's largest documentary film festival, and it's happening this week. So be sure and check them out. I got to see a little screener of this movie. The whole festival is virtual this year, so everyone can watch these movies from the comfort and safety of their home. Now, let me give you the scoop. It's not rated because it's a documentary, although I'd probably give it maybe a PG rating simply because there's some discussion of suicide in the movie itself, but there's no language. I'll give you some more tips for parents here in just a second. It's 80 minutes long, and the movie review mom grade I'm going to give it is an A minus, and I'll tell you why. But first, I'm going to give you a nutshell overview. I'll point out some tips for parents and some things I liked and didn't like, as well as a few interesting lines and that kind of stuff. But first, in a nutshell, when I was a child, I was allowed to wander around the neighborhood and go to friends' houses and play outside and then finally come back home in time for dinner. Despite my parents' painful divorce, my childhood was pretty carefree and fun. And things have definitely changed since then for kids. And that's what this movie is about. Overprotected and over directed American children are kind of wilting under the weight of well meaning parents in the pursuit of keeping them safe and creating an impressive resume of extracurricular activities to wow college admission boards. Over parenting smothers children across socioeconomic classes. This thoughtful documentary follows education professors and reformed helicopter parents who seek and offer solutions for developing more confident, independent young people while restoring some joy and freedom to childhood. So, this movie really takes a close look at the parenting styles of families that specifically are living in Wilton, Connecticut, analyzing the effects that their parenting style had on their children, who have now grown up to be what is commonly known as snowflake millennials, and who are struggling with kind of everyday decisions because they weren't given a lot of choices and free time and independence while they were growing up in their childhood. Well, at least that's what this movie talks about. Both parents and children are interviewed in this movie and asked to consider what worked and what didn't work. The movie was directed by Margaret Munster Loeb and Eden Wormfeld. They sent me this statement about their film. We are former roommates now raising kids in New York City, where we both grew up in the 70s and 80s. Our New York was gritty with surging crime rates, but the norms of childhood allowed us freedom, autonomy, and a concrete playground that informed how we learned to navigate the world as adults. At 6 years old, we both had a key around our necks, crossing the streets on our own to go to the local store, coming home after school, letting ourselves in, and climbing onto the counter to get a snack, maybe even scraping a knee on the way down. By the age of 8, we started taking public transportation alone, and the bus was filled with other school-aged kids without their parents. Had it all been benign neglect back then? We called those kids latchkey children, by the way. Or is it possible that we learned crucial life skills that our kids can no longer glean in their overscheduled, supervised lives? Although New York is now so much cleaner and safer than it was when we grew up, today's parenting norms have taken a drastic turn towards security, supervision, and micromanagement. Even just from our personal experience as parents, we know that our kids and their peer group are so delayed in their independence, their lives so filled with after school activities that they no longer have that blissful feeling of 3 p.m., school's out. How did we get here? And that's the premise for the movie. So, first, let me give you some quick tips for parents. As I mentioned, there is discussion of suicide attempts, and kids might be bored watching a documentary. However, they're definitely going to be interested in this topic because it's all about their ability to make choices and have more freedom. Use this opportunity, if you watch this movie with your kids, to talk about what you believe they can and can't do and why you've set up certain rules in your home. Invite them to honestly share their feelings about the pressures they feel to get good grades, be perfect, and then share some of the subjects that are addressed in this film. And I think it will be a fantastic launching point for a fantastic family council. There's no profanity, which is awesome. There are images of newspapers and signs revealing that children have been kidnapped. And so the directors of the film suggest that it was that type of imagery that was going on in the 70s and 80s that has created these helicopter parents that are so concerned for their children's safety. Although they do present some statistics about how it's very unlikely that you're going to have your kid be kidnapped. But more about that in a minute. Some themes that are addressed in the movie are childhood, obviously, parenting, free agency, choices, life balance. And then here's a quote by the narrator towards the beginning of the movie. She says, "All parents want their kids to excel, but too much pressure hurts more than it helps." And again, there's a whole big discussion about that in the film. Now, some things that I really liked about the movie are that it was really interesting to hear the different parents and the kids share their experiences. So Lenore Skenazy is one of the parents who's interviewed because she's been very actively engaged in the community to try to change this style of parenting. So she meets with a group of kids and she asks them, "How many of you come home from school and can just grab a snack and run outside and play?" Well, none of the kids raised their hands. Then they took turns reciting their very busy weekly schedules filled with various classes and lessons that they attended when school's out. And that kind of kickstarts this whole discussion. It was also really interesting to learn about free range legislation that's being enacted around the country, which basically assures parents that they will not be arrested if they determine that their kids are mature enough to do certain things like ride a bus or take the subway by themselves. And it's a controversial subject for sure, because there are parents who believe those things are extremely dangerous. And there are certain ages that are associated with when kids will be finally capable of doing those things alone. So it's a really interesting conversation. And you can actually learn more about the movie and some of that legislation and the efforts that are taking place in certain states at chasingchildhood.doc, D-O-C, as in documentary.com. Another issue that was mentioned in the film was the immense debt that parents often get themselves into just to pay for all of those lessons in soccer and piano, acting, gymnastics, and the list goes on. And I thought that that was really interesting because I always told my kids, if we can't afford a membership at the YMCA for you to take soccer lessons or whatever, you can't take soccer lessons. We never even thought about going into debt for that kind of stuff. So I thought that was particularly interesting. And by the way, one of my sons actually did play soccer at the YMCA. This would really be an effective film, I think, for schools to show and share with their parents at the beginning of every school year, just to make the point that there does need to be balance, that when those kids come home from school, and I have definitely found this true when I was raising my kids when they were young, especially in elementary school, they need to decompress. My mindset was, okay, let's bang out this homework, get it over with, so then we can relax and enjoy other things. But I found that that didn't work for my boys. They needed to come home, have a snack, chill, goof around, watch TV, play, whatever, and then we could start tackling the homework. But every family schedule is different, and I definitely understand that. But I think it would be good for schools to be able to have a conversation with their parents, that parents are allowing downtime where kids can just hang out and do nothing so that they can have that balance. Anyway, I think that's super important. Now, there were just a few things that I didn't like. And first of all, I thought, oh, I would be so embarrassed and heartbroken if one of my children made a film like this, announcing to the world that I was not a good mother. That would just be devastating. Now, of course, I'm the first to admit that I'm not a perfect parent. And the directors didn't point fingers at their parents and say they were terrible. I mean, clearly their parents produced very productive, talented kids, as filmmakers. That's awesome. I think it's a really delicate matter to judge anyone's parenting styles, because what works for one child, even within the same family, might not work for another child. And I have experienced that in my own parenting as well, that I had to constantly change how I was approaching my kids with various things, with homework, with allowance, with tasks, whatever it may be. And, I think parents generally are really doing the best that they know how to do. And I felt sometimes some fingers were pointed at some of these parents saying, oh, they shouldn't have done this, they shouldn't have done that. But at the time, that's what the parenting style was. And I think that parents want to be good parents. They really do. Now, it's a pretty straightforward documentary without much fluffy artistry involved. There are interviews and then they make points. There's some graphics, but it's not super, super creative in the storytelling itself. I've seen a lot of documentaries that really incorporate that artistry, and this one just didn't really focus on that. It was really more a factual, informative, eye-opening type of a documentary. And then one of the kids, this is a small matter, but one of the kids being interviewed complained that his parents were pushing him to be his best, as if that was a negative thing. And that was mentioned several times, that, oh, how terrible that these parents wanted their kids to get good grades and to develop talents, and that they needed to back off and just let them play. And again, we need to cut some slack for the parents that really do have the child's best interest at heart. They want their kids to get into a good college or get a good career. And so from their experience, what they're suggesting to their child is what they have seen to be successful. And so, yeah, it might be wrong, but again, we need to be a little bit gentle on how we judge parents who were really trying their very best. Now, let me share some interesting lines with you. And there were many. I like to include them in my written movie reviews at moviereviewmom.com. So if you want to see more of those, then head over to my website. But I'll share a few with you right now. Peter Gray is an author of a book about this issue, and he was interviewed several times in the course of the film. And so he says, towards the beginning, he says, we are living at a time that could be considered in some sense to be a social experiment. For the first time in the history of human beings, children are deprived of freedom. And one thing that I've learned, and one thing that I counsel parents, is to always give your kids choices, because you remember being a kid, I certainly do, being told this is what you're having for dinner, this is where you're going, this is what you're doing. And if parents can say, here are your two choices for dinner. I'm going to cook one of them, but what would you like to have? Then that child feels a sense of empowerment and learns how to make decisions, so that when they are released out into the world as young adults, that they have some practice making decisions. And in fact, I thought it was really interesting in the course of the movie, there was a dean of Stanford University who said these students who were extremely competent getting into Stanford have a really tough time making decisions. They'll call home and ask their parents, what should I do with basic choices? And so she saw that as one of the results of this helicopter micromanaging parenting style. So the more we can give choices to our kids that we consider acceptable, then the more chance that they have to develop that confidence that they can make good choices. And then again, as parents, we have to allow them the opportunity to make bad choices and suffer the consequences of those bad choices. And there was a little bit of discussion about that, not as much actually in the movie as I would have liked. But another comment from Peter Gray was, we're in a national crisis of mental health. Again, kind of referring to those millennials and even to some extent the Gen Z children who are now growing up and really struggling with depression and anxiety and stress over all of the pressures that have been placed on them. And if you're interested, I don't talk about this very often, but I offer a lot of online courses at lifelonglearningeducation.com. And one of them is a course on really helpful tools and techniques to manage depression, anxiety, and stress. So you can check that out. And right now, it's 90% off if you use the promo code Corona 2020 because so many people need that course right now. Anyway, some other quotes are, one is by Julie Lythcott Hames, and she says, I think in some ways we have mortgaged our kids' childhood in exchange for the chance that they will have the grand future that we have in mind for them. And that was the dean at Stanford University. And I thought that was a really good point because even again, in my experience, I have an idea of what I want my kids to do when they grow up. And some of them have surprised me. They don't want my ideas, my plans. They have other talents and a totally different idea of what they want to do, which is fine. And parents need to be able to release those apron strings and allow our kids to go into the world and to find their own way and to create their own life. So our job as parents is to help them learn how to create a happy, balanced, productive life. All right, I had more comments again on my website, so check that out. And thank you so much for all of your financial support on Patreon. So be sure and check out the link down below to get to my Patreon page. And you can see all kinds of gifts that I offer at all kinds of different tiers. Anyway, that's it for today. Be sure and check out that documentary film festival that's going online right now. I'll catch you in the next movie review. Until then, bye for now.